And welcome to the Unknown Webcast. And this is just a bit of a trigger warning for those who believe words are more injurious than sticks and stones. I really am so conservative, I can't turn left even when I'm driving. In addition to giving trigger warnings to our viewers, Ron Hensel and I both drink coffee for your protection.
Yes, we do.
Yes. This week, Vocab Malone joins us as we ponder the question, just how big is Black Hebrew Israelite movement? My name is Don Vino. I'm president of Midwest Christian Outreach Inc. in Wonder Lake, Illinois, which produces the Unknown Webcast. And our senior researcher is Ron Hensel, and here is Ronnie Baby.
Greetings from sunny Florida, where the palm tree came out, saw its shadow, and now we have 12 more months of summer. Our sponsor for this edition of the Unknown Webcast is the Bible Buffet. It's not your father's worship experience, the Bible Buffet. Our regular legal disclaimer, our guest on today's webcast, insert name here, that would be Vocab Malone, has no connection whatsoever to any of the satirical content of the Unknown Webcast, hereafter referred to as the webcast, although we probably will not mention it again. This satirical content includes any and all commercials, end credits, puns, smart remarks, or anything that might fall under the definition of satire. In the meantime, Midwest Christian Outreach Inc. bears no liability for or responsibility for anyone's opinions regarding this satirical content. Notice, the opinions expressed on this webcast are ours and should be yours too. If you enjoy it or if it annoys you and you want to inflict it on someone else to ensure your continued access to this program, please go to midwestoutreach.org, click the yellow donate button, and contribute as you feel led. And as you do, never fear, this webcast is Y2K compliant. And don't forget to subscribe to us on your favorite video channels. And now our special, very special guest, one of a kind, Vocab Malone. Greetings, Vocab. We have all the sincerity in the world for you right here. There he is. He puts on the hat. Now we know we're cooking here. Cooking with gas. So, greetings. Welcome. What does the hat say? What is the little tiny thing?
I think it says, life is good. I think that's what it says.
So this makes people come up very close to you, get right in your face so they can read your hat, and then probably leads to many altercations, but
hopefully not if they've read some Greek philosophy.
Well, here we go. There's a little better.
Learning about the good life. Actually, I don't know what it says. Maybe it says worldwide. I don't know what.
Is it in another language? I can't even see the letters on it.
I think it says, let's get this show started.
There you
Yes,
go.
exactly so.
I know it said something.
So, Vocab Malone, I've known about you for quite a while, and we've been trying to work around getting you on with us, and schedules didn't always match, so we're glad you're here. So, let me ask the first question. How did you become interested in the Hebrew Israelite movement?
So a friend calls me and says, hey, these group of guys are going into our old neighborhood, and they're coming into church services, yelling at people, saying some weird stuff about the real Jews, and then leaving. And I said, what is that? So I wanted to find out what that was. And so I did a little research and got an understanding. And then one day I saw them on the corner in my neighborhood. I said, I know what that is. And I bet no one else out on the corner knows what that is. So I should probably go talk to these guys. I went and talked to those guys, and that was about a decade ago, and I'm still talking to those guys.
So you go out onto the street corners where they inhabit mostly. They're more in metropolises than they are in suburbs, aren't they?
Yeah, but that's definitely changing. Not as much in suburbs per se, but in rural areas. Because for decades, Hebrew Israelism didn't have much success in the Bible Belt. But now, with things being different these days, Hebrew Israelism's main growth sector apparently is in the South. And so that includes small towns. I have a friend who lives pretty close to Greenville Presbyterian Theological Seminary. He was going some small towns through South Carolina, these towns that have one gas station. Well, guess what he found out at that? Guess what he saw as he drove by that one gas station? He saw a group of Hebrew Israelites out there, some town I'd never heard of. He actually had never heard of. So you're seeing this exponential growth, and it's interesting because not a lot of religions really in America are growing per se. The Mormons were the scare of the 80s or whatever. Jehovah's Witnesses, not so much now, right? But
Right.
Hebrew Israelites are growing, no doubt.
Yeah, right. So our sort of homegrown cults like Jehovah's Witnesses, they've been around since late 1800s. Mormons earlier or early 1800s to mid 1800s. And it's kind of like we're getting some more. What do I want to call them? I don't know. I don't know what I want to call them. More interesting, newer sort of cults and false religious groups, and it sort of goes along also with the growth of other religions in our country right now, and few understand them. Wicca is another big one. I mean, Wicca is supposedly one of the fastest growing religious views in Western culture right now.
So we were what was it, before the program, or I think it was before, we were talking about how Black Hebrew Israelitism is kind of a repackaging of a repurposing of British Israelism or Anglo Israelism for the African American community, it sounds like.
Oh, there's definitely some truth to that. The two groups are not exactly very aware of each other, I don't think.
Really? That's interesting.
There's not a whole lot of consciousness of the other group as far as on large scales. I do think some of the old leadership, from the old leadership of some of the Hebrew Israelite groups back in the 60s, I do think that they hijacked some of the old British Israelite arguments, but I don't think the general followers know that. I'll give you an example. Brit-ish. Berit sounds like covenant, and ish is like the Hebrew word for man. So Berit-ish is covenant man.
In Anglo-Saxons, Isaac's sons.
Yeah.
Not
the latter argument, but the former argument the Hebrew Israelites use to show that at one time Britain was basically controlled like a black aristocracy. And so they have some of these guys, not all, but a lot of these groups have a revision of world history on a global scale as well.
I always suspected, that could be.
Yeah, there's a 2016 Netflix movie that came out. It was called Barry. I'm sure you guys both saw it because I know you're big fans of Barack Obama. And it was an autobiography sort of his life. That was a joke, by the way. And it was about when he was 21 years old going to school in Columbia. Now, why am I telling you about this? Because in that movie, there's a brief scene where he's walking through Harlem because Columbia is close to that. And you had to go on 125th Street. And there's a scene where he interacts with some Hebrew Israelites in this movie, right? And there's a drunk white lady and the Hebrew Israelites in the Barack Obama movie called Barry. They say, look at this lady, da-da-da. They say a bunch of foul stuff. And Barack Obama's character kind of comes to her rescue and says, well, hold on now. If you're against the white devil, then why do you use his Bible? And he's like, what do you mean? He's like, well, you're using the King James. And he says, King James was a so-called black man. And he points to a picture, ostensibly, of King James on a board beside him and says, looks like Billy D. Williams, if you ask me. And if to the audience who may or may not know who Billy D. Williams, Lando Calrissian.
Oh, come on.
Not everyone knows who Lando Calrissian is these days.
You got it. Lando.
And yeah, so some of them do teach that. Now, other groups of Hebrews, so there's different factions, right? They don't engage in such large-scale historical revisionism, but quite a number do. Usually the guys out on the street are the worst-case offenders.
The worst-case offenders in
massive swaths of historical revisionism.
Oh, yeah.
And also the worst arguments known to man. I mean, the leader of IUIC, and this is a large group. We're talking approaching 10,000 members these days. They marched before the last Super Bowl. The leader of IUIC said, you want proof or evidence that black aristocracy ran Europe? And by the way, this is black Jewish aristocracy or black Israelite aristocracy ran Europe. They were called the Knights of the Round Table because they were black as night.
Oh,
And
boy.
it's called the Dark Ages because we ran it. It was literally the Dark Ages.
You
Now
know, it's
you
all
think
starting to make sense to me. It's all coming together.
yeah,
Yeah.
you think I'm joking, and then you go watch TikTok, and you're like, oh wait, these are real arguments.
Oh,
Okay,
believe me, I don't think you're joking one bit. I mean, I've come across some of the zaniest stuff. Now, I first bumped into the Anglo-Israelite movement. Well, I was aware of Armstrong's Worldwide
yeah,
Church of God and all that, but I didn't realize that it had morphed into a kind of an Aryan nation thing in the early
yeah.
80s until it actually invaded the church I was attending or I was working at the time. And yeah, I mean, some of the weird stuff that you read in that, it just nothing really surprises me anymore.
Right, and you have that with Shepherd's Chapel,
Yep.
described as the same kind of a thing. So, yeah.
And there was a
Yes.
best-selling book that what was the name of that book? The 13th Tribe.
Arthur Kessler.
Arthur Kessler. Yeah, that I got a copy of that somewhere in my house. It's so this was seriously promoted, and there was a big connection with really vicious racism and anti-Semitism, especially anti-Semitism back then.
Yeah, the
So-
Arthur Kessler book. The essence of it is supposed to be that modern day Ashkenazi Jews are actually just Khazars.
Right.
And
Right.
what happens is, though, these groups that experience extreme Jew hatred, they'll use the Arthur Kessler work and they'll be like, well, have you read the 13th Tribe? Now, here's the thing. A lot of these groups, and I'm not just talking about Hebrew Israelites now, I'm talking about your everyday, anti-Semite, if you want to use that term that you run into on Twitter or whatever, they'll say, "Oh, the 13th tribe proves they're not even." And if you read the 13th tribe, which I have,
Yeah.
and I have highlights all in it, he says that these arguments would only apply for Ashkenazim, first of all, and then second of all, he says, and I can't be sure, and I don't, and he doesn't have numbers. Now I'm paraphrasing, but this is in
Right.
essence what it says. And so I'm like, well, have you read it? Because it doesn't even do what you think it's
Right.
doing. And
Right.
by the way, let's just say the thesis was true. That all Jews, that's not the thesis of the book, but that's the way the promoters often utilize it. All Jewish folks were not Israelites. They were actually just converts, That doesn't mean you're an Israelite, bud.
No.
Right. Right.
Just
Doesn't
because
follow.
they're not doesn't mean you are. You can
Right.
disqualify first place from winning the race. That doesn't mean the guy in last place is all of a sudden getting the gold medal,
Yeah. That's true.
Yeah. It's not even good logic, unfortunately. But when someone's invested in something, logic is not relevant, and actual history is not relevant
No.
because
Well-
they cannot give up on it.
The Anglo-Israelite or the Church of the Aryan Nation brand of it, which became really the dominant one in the 80s, led to a lot of hostility on their part toward the Jews. So is it fair to say that the Black Hebrew Israelite movement has done the same thing with its members?
So I do hold that it's very difficult to meet a Hebrew Israelite who's not experiencing regular forms of Jewish hatred. And every now and then you will, but by and large, it's part of the religion almost. And so it's really bizarre. They have common cause sometimes with groups you wouldn't think they would have common cause with. And sometimes they even share some of the same memes. And you're like, hold on. And so I don't know if people have been paying attention to the devolution of Kanye West's philosophy and theology. There's a time, briefly during the Tucker Carlson interview where it seemed like he was experiencing some degree of wake up in regards to pro-life issues and this and that. But peppered in there was some weird stuff. And a lot of the weird stuff had to do with, well, I'm from the tribe of Judah. And what about these Jewish folks? Well, he's kind of continued on that path, not very informed even from that kind of perspective. But you see this example where they often do go hand in hand. And now he's, doing interviews and stuff where he's wearing the infamous sign on his shirt and selling the infamous sign in his website store, which he advertised
What is
the
it?
swastika.
Oh, okay.
And he even advertised his. I don't know if you guys know about this. Kanye West did a Super Bowl ad on his phone. He's like, "Hey, I paid $7 million for this ad. Go to my web store." When you went to the web store, in between when the ad released and when he had recorded it, he scrubbed his web store so it only sold one shirt. Guess what the one shirt was? It was a swastika. Kanye West just did this in February.
Wow.
Now, my point is not to say he's a card-carrying member of Hebrew Israelites. It is he has imbibed some Hebrew Israelism, but my point is how you see common cause with people that you would understand to be, okay, these are clearly anti-Semitic people like the Nick Fuentes of the world and whatnot. And you have this strange overlap with a reevaluation of Hitler, the Nazis, the Holocaust. A famous meme that a lot of Hebrew Israelites share is supposedly a private conversation that Hitler had with one of his soldiers where he says, "Hey, look, one day people are going to realize what I did was the right thing. And they're going to realize that God's real jewels, the Israelites, they're actually in America. And this is what's really going on with this war. It ties into this larger thing." You can find the full quote. It's always in memes all over. Well,
so like he was saying, and was Hitler saying that they were black people?
Yes, that was the implication of the quote. Now here's the thing, though. Hitler never said this.
No. He said pretty much the opposite.
Yeah. He persecuted what are called Afro-Germans, number one.
Right.
Number two, if you read the meme itself, just like a basic critical thinking, you would realize this is not sourced properly, to put it mildly. Why is Hitler having this conversation with the way it's worded is like just one of his soldiers? And it's always dubbed as a private conversation. Well, if it's private and it's with the soldier, how do we know?
Right.
When did this happen? Where did this happen? Well, everything about the quotation when you read it is ridiculous. Now, here's where it ties into pop culture. Kyrie Irving tweeted a movie called Hebrews to Negroes that got him in big trouble. He's now plays for the Mavericks, but at the time he played for the Knicks. The Nets, the Brooklyn Nets. And he tweeted this movie that contains that quote, right? Well, I went to the trouble of buying the book. I've actually got the Time Life book they say it comes from, the page number. It says no such thing, by the way. That actual page is filled with Nazi propaganda about the Jewish people being like a mulatto race with no home and all that nonsense.
Mongrel, yeah.
But it doesn't have anything to do. Yeah, mongrel is the term they use. Yes, you're correct. That doesn't have anything to do with this quote. But this has got the kind of thing that's going on. And I'm not saying all Hebrew Israelites. I'm mentioning more of the extreme end.
Yeah. Well,
but it does exist.
For anyone to say that Hitler had any, Hitler would not even shake the hand of
Jesse Owens.
Jesse Owens. I mean, he would tell his people and especially his military, there's nothing to fear from America because they're a mongrel nation. They don't know how to fight. They're not good Aryan warriors. So he believed that we had so diluted our bloodlines with blacks and other race groups. So it's utterly preposterous. But I guess this just shows the level of education. I mean, when I was in high school, I think the average high schooler that I hung around with knew more about history and ideological things like the differences between communism and capitalism than most adults do today.
Yeah, absolutely.
But we were in the middle of the Cold War and there was a civil rights movement going on and this stuff was in the news, it was in the air, it was in the water, Now it's like nobody had to think about it for the last, 40 to 50 years. So they don't know anything about it.
Well, and we're kind of watching this. This is one group, and we want to talk more about this, but this is one group among many, which, let's say, even blacks raised in the church can I say blacks or is that racist?
I always prefer black Americans or
okay, black Americans.
Are you white-splaining again, Don?
Yes, I'm asking. I have friends that we talk about this, and it's like, whatever, we just call each other by our first names, so it's not a big deal.
Yeah.
But this is going to be out in public here, so I want to try to get fairly close to something acceptable. Anyway, what I'm noticing is that there's and this is not Black American churches, but this is church in general. So little actual solid teaching on Christianity and scriptures that people are open to buy into virtually anything. The second thing is, we just watched hashtag BLM not that many years ago that kind of swept the nation, and few people realize that is an African religion from West Africa called Ifa. And when they were calling out the names, they weren't just calling out the names of those who had deceased, but they were calling on the spirits of the deceased to come and empower them to do, quote, the work, end quote. And the same is true with Umbanda. That comes from it. There's several, 5 or 6 kind of denominations of Ifa floating around, and many of the celebrities are very involved with this stuff. So it doesn't surprise me when you talk about um, what you were just talking about with this group. So they're looking for something. Chuck Langer is asking you a question here. I've been trying to figure out how to get in contact with you in regards to a Hebrew Israelite cult run by a white guy named Paul Maslowski. I escaped Hebrew Israelism after about 10 years.
Whoa, 10
Uh,
years.
do you want him to give us email us and I could send it on to you?
Yeah. Email's fine. I try to make your email as specific as possible, because with the growth of this thing, and I'm bivocational, I've become overwhelmed
Yeah, I
with
do
the
too.
amount of correspondence,
Yeah,
and it's really heartbreaking because a lot of it is my husband joined, my wife joined, my child joined, my grandson joined, my stepson joined, and now they're a totally different person, and I don't know how to get them out.
right.
And I feel very inundated with it. I think I need to do some kind of training sessions about how to help family members break out of this, so all these folks can go to one thing, because there's no way I can deal with each individual one.
Right.
And I'm just trying to work through how to do that, because there's really no material out there quite like that for this group. But yeah, but his question, I don't know who this particular gentleman is he's mentioning off the top of my head, but what it shows is, that's why I use the term Hebrew Israelism,
Right.
because first of all, there's a precedent: Anglo Israelism, British Israelism, you see there.
Mhm.
And then what it does is allows you to get outside of the mindset of they're going to be in a group. What it allows you to understand is they could have this ideology, believing it to a lesser or a greater degree, right? But they're imbibing Hebrew Israelism, but they may be in a Christian Protestant church. They could be a so-called white person, black person, Filipino, whatever they are, and they're still believing these elements that are traditionally associated with Black Israelism, as a lot of scholars call it, or to be some mildly less offensive, as I call it, Hebrew Israelism. A lot of the folks get up in arms about using the term Black Israelism, and I'm fine using the term Hebrew Israelism. But it shows there's definitely a diversity of a spectrum. And when people are like, I don't know how to study this, I can't keep track of all the groups, I just tell them, it's not a big deal. After 10 years, you'll get the hang of it.
Yeah.
It only take you a little bit, yeah.
That's kind of like we get calls about Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons, Wiccans, you kind of name progressives. Where do I start? And with everyone, I kind of start in the same place. You have to ask yourself, what is their investment? What brought them into it? And it's different for everybody. Once you find out what the investment is, then we can talk about what direction to take in talking to them. So
When I
but
hear about people having to escape from it,
yeah,
it makes me think of what kind of, or how difficult was that? That's the question that comes up in my mind. Was it difficult because of issues in a belief system? In other words, I just couldn't get out of it because I still thought it was right? Or were there pressures? Were there social pressures? Were people threatening some kind of consequence, like shunning, for example, if you leave.
Right. That's a big one.
Well,
So,
it is like it is really like basically every cult group you've seen. Some of the groups do that. Now, there are groups of Hebrew Israelites who don't function like a cult at all. They
right.
function basically like churches that have some different ideology, and it's difficult because it's not really totally fair to lump them in the same thing. But the thing is, they're still imbibing elements of Hebrew Israelism, so it's the same ideological spectrum.
Yeah.
But some of these church groups that do not function like cults in any way, yes, we have disagreements with them, but they're not like the guys out on the corner who descend from an ideological school that was started in Harlem. They're just very different, and it's difficult. So it's like with anything. Look, folks, if you're going to do this stuff, just don't think you know it all, no matter who you are.
Right.
You meet someone in one of these groups, you just learn the art of asking questions.
Right.
Don't think because you watched this program or read a book that you know everything about whatever. Just ask the questions. And if you become skilled in the art of listening and asking questions, and you know some Bible, you'll be surprised how far you can go. That's almost the most important skill in some ways you can know as an apologist, which I think is fulfilling what Paul said in Colossians 4:5-6. And I love that verse. Answer each one with grace as they ought to be answered. I'm paraphrasing, but that's the essence of what he said. It's a beautiful thing. This is about walking in wisdom toward outsiders. And that's really the key, because you can get all this information, but if you're not asking and listening. Now, not everything's asking and listening. I do a lot of asking and listening, but I do, and this is not for everybody. I do go out on the street. And if you see me in a street context, I'm out there to do polemics. I'm not out there to be a bridge builder. I'm just saying straight up. So in that context, you might see me now and be like, oh, this vocab guy's all right. You might see me out on the street and be like, I don't like this vocab guy anymore. But I do believe people are called to do polemics in certain contexts and even in targeted situations. And I will say this, and I want to make sure I don't go long-winded, but let me briefly say this. If you read through the book of Acts, look for the phrase synagogue, and especially when you see the phrase into the synagogue, you will find 10, 11 times where Paul and the apostolic circle literally go into synagogues. Now, I'm not saying it's identical, but there is a parallel, I do believe, to go to where a group is. Jehovah's Witnesses at the bus stop, you go to them with that intention. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And that's what I do with the Hebrew Israelite groups out on the corner. Now, if I'm going to visit one of their services and it's a friendly bunch of them, like the Church of God and Saints of Christ, I'm not going to go in there, arms flailing and, with a microphone. But on the corner where they're out there passing out propaganda and they're not trying to have a conversation, then it's going to be a little bit different. So that's my philosophy of it, but it takes all types. But here, I just want to reiterate, this is one of the growing religions in America. Not all religions in America are growing. It looks like Islam might be by birth rates and immigration. Hebrew Israelism is a growing belief system in America. And there's data that shows it from the Manhattan Institute and the Philos Project, which is connected to the Lifeway research. We have 2 sets of data within the past 6 years that tell us this thing is growing.
Right. So, and it's exotic. That's what I like. It's an exotic religion that's not Christianity. And those are attracting people. Now, just to kind of reaffirm what you said about this, as we've mentioned in emails back and forth, I go to things like Paganicon. There's 1,000 witches, Wiccans, Satanists, Druids. You kind of find all of the pagans in one location, and we start by just asking questions. That's number one. Number two, in the process of dialogue, it is likely I'm not going to really see the person I'm talking to come to the faith. They might, but we continue the dialogue for what I call the lurkers, the people that are watching, because they don't have a vested interest in the debate per se. Therefore, they can actually listen to both sides and consider what it is that we're saying to one another. So I agree with you. You need to have information to understand what they believe, but you have to really have a heart for reaching that person. And questions, in fact, the book Tactics, I usually, when someone contacts me and say, I want to do this, I tell them, okay, start with Kuko's book Tactics. It's kind of like Greg followed me around and watched what I do and wrote it down. or he just does it the same way I do.
Yeah.
So yeah, so those are good heads up things. And talking about heads up things, we have to hear from our sponsor. There we go.
Yeah, because they have some questions. Are you tired of hearing all about the difference between the milk of the word and the meat of the word? Are you wondering when your church is going to get around to serving the ice cream and cheesecake of the word? Does your pastor take that whole Bible thing way too seriously? Well, then you need to check out the Bible Buffet. It's not your father's worship experience. Everything at the Bible Buffet is prepared with your comfort and enjoyment in view. Everything there is gluten free, trans fat free, and truth claim free. And all of their dishes are piping hot and ready to eat. And even if COVID should come back, because that's when we first made this commercial, they're always open with the Bible Buffet carryout. The regular Sunday specials include Aryan appetizers, Sabellian succotash, Galatian goulash, Gnostic nut salad, Pelagian pie, and Socinian salad. And don't forget, the Bible Buffet is a fully accredited ministry of the Church of Smorgasbordianism. The Bible Buffet, it's not your father's worship experience, but it should be yours. So we lost vocab, it looks like.
No, well, maybe he might be on the phone. So we're
No,
gonna have to
no, I'm here. I
Okay.
just did that for when the commercial's on. That's all.
Oh,
Okay.
you didn't want to be tempted to go to the Bible Buffet. I
Yes,
see. I
lost
see how it is.
and
Yeah, that
lost.
smorgasbordism or whatever,
It's
you know.
Smorgasbordianism.
Yeah.
That's right. So, all right, down to the kind of the nitty gritty. You want to try to talk with someone, and there's some preparation that needs to be done. We've talked about that. What are some of the core beliefs then of maybe we might think about them as denominations? Because as you point out, there's a variety of groups within the umbrella of Hebrew Israelism. So, what is it that you want to really study and understand to get a grasp of it?
The book of Galatians is your best friend.
Hmm.
You know, that's the best place to start first and foremost. So it's good to study all the groups and all their different beliefs. That's what I spend an inordinate amount of time on. However, Galatians is so key. It's almost like the Apostle Paul was looking into the future, you know, by the Spirit of God and said, oh, there's going to be these Hebrew Israelites. Let me write a book against them. Now, I understand there's obviously the first century context. I say that tongue in cheek. But the point is, it does so much damage to everything they teach, from the sort of ethnic or racial elements with the food laws and you know, this idea of we're gonna dump Moses on top of Jesus and all this kind of stuff. And you realize, oh, okay. So Galatians is key. But then honestly, hey, I would tell people to get my book. Now, you guys aren't going to like the title of it, but hopefully you understand the reason I titled it this way. Number one, it's catchy. Number two, it's based upon that movie scene I mentioned earlier. It's called Barack Obama versus the Black Hebrew Israelites. And it's a little primer, and it's available on Amazon on a lot of the groups. It's very basic and easy, and I'd recommend that. But Galatians is first. By the way, I saw we had some Hebrew Israelite videos saying the devils are having crafty counsel together.
Yeah,
that's. Did you guys see his name? Did you notice his first name?
I
there?
did. I did. I'll put it back up so everyone else can see it again.
Azrael. Okay. I'm trying to see, because you can learn a lot about these guys by how they do their name.
Okay.
Azrael makes me think he's not fully a one Wester, because he's not using what's called one Westism is a ideological faction within Hebrew Israelism, and a lot of one Westers have a strange distinctive of they've adopted their own version of Hebrew dialect. And so if he was a one Wester, his name would be Yasharal or Yasharallah, but he has Azrael. So he's probably not a one Wester. Now, that doesn't mean he doesn't have one West ideas. By his use of saying devils, he has some one West ideas, but he doesn't adopt what's called Lashawan Quadash. Lashawan Quadash is an alternative pronunciation of Hebrew that eliminates most of the vowel sounds, replacing them with usually in most cases. With other exceptions, you'll get other words. But so Yahweh is Yahweh. I'm sorry, Yahweh is Yahweh, and Yeshua is Yahawashai under this rendering. And it's a telltale sign you're dealing with a one Wester when they use that version of Hebrew called Lashawan Quadash.
So I take
Now,
it that this is like a shibboleth type thing. You can
Yeah,
tell where
yeah.
they come from ideologically. So what
Mhm.
a one Wester is? Are they particularly known for anything besides
M-
different pronunciation?
Most of the guys on the street that you'll see descend ideologically from one West. Now, here's the thing. Don, Ron, you guys might meet a Hebrew Israelite. They might be a one Wester, but they're not going to say, I'm part of one West most of the
Right.
time.
Right.
Most of them don't even know what one West is.
Right.
So here's one West is not a group. One West is akin to Calvinism. There's not a denomination called Calvinism, right? It's an ideological subset, if you want to use that term, of Protestantism. One Westism is an ideological subset. I'll give you an example here. Certain groups of Jewish folks took a name from the town they came from, Lubavitch. So
Oh,
you call
yeah.
them the Lubavitchers.
Okay.
One
yeah.
West is an address in Harlem.
Aha.
Oh,
One West, 125th Street. Now, they don't
Yeah.
have a school there anymore, but for years they did. And a lot of the distinctives that now we see on corners across America, a lot of these distinctives, such as the 12 tribes chart, a lot of these. So I see we have some informed people in the chat, by the way. So he knows some of the history of One West. Might be what he's saying is accurate. A lot of these distinctives came out of One West 125th Street. Like I said, they're not at that address anymore, but One West, there's even a Wikipedia. Now, it's not totally accurate. I probably need to go fix it because I don't know who did it. There's actually a Wikipedia entry now for One West. So it has a little bit of some people in the NRM field, the New Religious Movement studies, some of them, a very small amount. When I say some, I mean like 2 or 3 that I'm aware of. They actually know what One West is. So it's getting some understanding. Okay, here's how we can distinguish Hebrew Israelites from each other. But there's a bunch of schools or camps that fall under the banner of One West.
What do one Westers believe that the other ones don't?
12 tribes chart's the big thing. So who's your father? Oh, well, I'm Puerto Rican. You're Puerto Rican. You're of Ephraim. Turn to Genesis 49.
Yeah,
Read.
Okay.
I'm Dominican. You're Simeon. Turn to Genesis 49. Read.
Okay.
The big thing is the 12 tribes chart. Yeah, Mike B is right. Everything he's saying, he's correct about, by the way. At least what's on the screen.
Yeah. So, and they're just basically pulling this out of thin air. I mean,
well, let me tell you, the chart supposedly comes from the Lord. REI apparently was in construction. That's his name.
As I said, they're just pulling it out of thin air.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm sorry if I offended somebody, but they're just pulling it out of thin air.
Yeah. So REI was in construction and apparently had an accident. I guess he fell down the elevator shaft and apparently broke both legs, and he was laid up in the hospital. Yeah. Well, he's like 84. This was a long time ago. This was like maybe in the 60s or 70s. We're not exactly sure when this happened because it's not clear. The disciples of the disciples of the disciple of these guys is what we're stuck with as far as oral reports, and they're not always accurate. Right. This group has not gone to great pains to track their history because they don't really care. The key piece is I'm an Israelite and those other guys aren't. So their history is not that important to them as an ideological movement because they think, well, what do you mean my history? My history is Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. No, it starts with REI. Come on. Well, they don't really care or understand a lot of times. But REI apparently was laid up in the hospital for a while and received this chart from the Lord. And then when he presented it to the school, his master teacher, who supposedly was still alive at the time, a guy named Abba Bivens, real name Edward Meredith Bibbins, co-signed it. And then what happens is the school started researching it and found out it was true. This is the story as they tell it. Then we came to find out it really is true. Native Americans really did speak Hebrew when James Adair went and visited them. In fact, the Mormons believe it too. Read this book by James Adair. By the way, everything I just said is true again.
Yes, right.
Yeah. So there's actually common cause with some Mormon stuff and some One West Hebrew Israelite stuff.
So what would you say the numbers are of just the broadest possible definition of a Hebrew Israelite?
Okay. I'm pulling up the Philos report by Lifeway Research right now. If you wanted to find it, I could drop it to you guys in the live chat. I got a PDF for it. I don't know. Here, I see our private chat. I'm going to drop the link to you. You have the PDF right now. and I'm clicking on it. And when you go to page 43, it says that, they had surveyed Black Americans, is what they did. And they asked them, it says like a survey size of, I think, around 1,000 or so. I forget the exact amount. And here's what it says. Here's your options. Okay, here's the options. I am not familiar with Black Hebrew Israelite teachings. I firmly oppose the teachings of Black Hebrew Israelites. I didn't come up with the wording, by the way. This is the survey's wording. I disagree with most of the core ideas taught by Black Hebrew Israelites. I agree with most of the core ideas taught by Black Hebrew Israelites. I consider myself a Black Hebrew Israelite. Now, let me run it back. Hold on. So first of all, why is this even a survey question? Because Philo's project is in association with Lifeway Research. That you found it. There you go. Thank you. Here's the reason why this is a survey question. Somebody on the team, and I don't know all the details, but I have a friend of a friend who says he was the one who said, hey, they should have this question. So I guess my friend told my other friend, hey, you should include this. Well, what's the survey about? The survey is technically called African American Attitudes Towards Israel, right? So in that, they put this question because they consider it relevant. The survey is not about this, but this question was there. It's question 47. Which of the following best describes your opinion of Black Hebrew Israelite teachings? Here's the thing. 4% doesn't sound anything to most people. However, how many Black Americans do you think there are? Depending on which census you go with, let me tell you, folks, this equals no less than 1.5 million people who consider themselves a Hebrew Israelite.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a big number. I mean, when you look at denominations in this country, that's a pretty big number. Yep. And then 19% agree with most of the core ideas.
Yes. 23% of Black Americans, if this has any correct, if this is accurate at all, 23% of Black Americans in some way agree. Now, let's track this. We're going to track this in real time. I'm going to drop another one. Now, this one's a little trickier. This one's a little trickier because it's kind of more, he's got a lot more going on here. This is more in depth. This is also more recent. This was published December of 2023. So this is with the Manhattan Institute. Manhattan Institute is like a conservative think tank, and not actually in Manhattan, but in DC. And Charles Lehman, a Jewish conservative gentleman who I interviewed on this topic, as part of the report, a key element was to find out how many of these guys are there. And so if you look, you can download the PDF right there. Now, it's really long. This is much more in depth than the Philos Project one, which had an incidental question. This one's not an incidental question. This is basically the survey is intended to find out how many guys there are and what kind of beliefs they have. Okay, that's like what's going on with it, right? And like I said, you could download it. Now, here's the key thing. Do you see that first bullet point? Can you guys scroll down a little bit and maybe zoom in? Okay, stop right there. Now, maybe if you can hit Command plus or just zoom in a tad, or maybe just highlight. If you can't, no big deal. Highlight, if you could, the very first. Okay, yeah. Now go. You'll have to go back down. There you go. Highlight that first bullet point, please. The whole bullet point. Could you guys read that?
Roughly 26% of the Black population and 14% of the non-Black population plausibly profess to believe that modern American Blacks are descended from the ancient Israelites, the key belief of Black Hebrew Israelism. So,
you guys, first of all, this is a difference. These two surveys are a difference of about 2 or 3 years. They're both within the margin of error of each other, but let's just take them at face value. That means in the 2 or 3 years, there was a growth rate of 2%.
Right.
And depending on how you look at this. Now, I'm not a statistician. I'm not a sociologist. But you guys understand kind of the rough back of the envelope calculations I'm doing here. Do you see how they track, though? This shows the Philos Institute wasn't off in theirs because this was much more in depth. And this is basically the same number, 24, 20. So an easy way to deal with this is a quarter. A quarter says, yeah, those are the real Israelites. Notice, though, 14% of the non-Black population. And that's why I tell people this is about Hebrew Israelism, not necessarily about Black Hebrew Israelites. You understand what I'm saying there?
Sure. Yeah.
And the sample sizes were roughly the same, by the way. This one was bigger. This was a more in-depth, and he knows the numbers like he's really good at explaining them, because he's the one who commissioned it, and this is sort of his specialty. In fact, when I met him, he was a researcher at the Manhattan Institute. Now he's the prez of the Manhattan Institute.
Oh, wow.
So this guy's no slouch, and neither is his team. But do you guys understand? I'm when I say you guys, I don't mean just Ron and Don. I'm talking to the audience here.
The audience,
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, just how big of and pervasive this ideology is spreading.
Well, I'm going to do something just slightly different, unrelated to this, but related to the bigger question of where the churches are at in a lot of these things. And I've done this in the past, couple of webcasts, because it comes up. In 2017, Barna and Summit Ministries discovered that only 17% of Christians actually have a biblical worldview. Now that's across all, doesn't matter racial, it's just the church in general. In 2021, that had dropped to 9%. So 17% to 9% in that 4-year period of time. By 2022, only 37% of Christian pastors in the U.S. have a biblical worldview. So if your pastors don't have a biblical worldview, and most Christians don't have a biblical worldview, they're going to go to something because they are spiritually interested.
Yeah. Well, what strikes me about this is my experience with Anglo-Israelism and how it differs. Anglo-Israelism never caught on the way this is in the white community. Yeah, I mean, okay, so to be specific, the Anglo-Israelism, I almost like to think of it as white Israelism, because they would include not just Anglo-Saxons, but Celtic people and Germanic people and other white Europeans as part of the the 10 lost tribes of northern Israel, and that never caught on. So this is the story of Celto-Saxon Israel. There you go.
I have a bunch of Anglo-Saxon books, by the way. Yeah. I just wanted to show you that real quick.
And this you would think this would appeal. Maybe, I mean, why doesn't, I think the question comes up, why didn't this have the same appeal for white people? And there's Yair Davidley, okay, Israelite origins of Western Europe. Yeah. Why didn't this catch on? I mean, there's plenty of literature, but in terms of adherence, you will not find statistics like this. 26% or whatever of white Americans believe that they're Israelites, but you do find it in the Black community. And my suggestion is that white communities, they're not searching for an identity. Maybe I'm putting this as a question, maybe to Vocab, and anyone else who wants to answer it. It seems to speak to a search for identity in the Black community. They're either not happy with they're not happy with the identity they already have, or maybe they never even thought they had one. And here is something to latch onto. I kind of compare it to, in my mind, the comparison that comes up is, why are so many evangelical kids, young people, and even older people gravitating toward, let's say, Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodoxy? And a lot of times it has less to do with theology than it does to do with what appears to be something that gives them roots, something that gives them an ancient, lineage, so to speak. I can trace a spiritual lineage all the way back to the first pope. This has a lot of appeal to a lot of people because they feel kind of rootless in North American evangelicalism. Well, what do you say in Vocab and others in terms of what is driving this increase in popularity that hasn't worked with Anglo-Israelism, but it is working with Black Hebrew Israelism?
Well, I mean, one thing is, I think the apologists in regards to Anglo-Israelism, I think they did their job. I got a lot of old books, like this one's by Talbot, what's wrong with Anglo-Israelism, and there's just
Okay.
book after book, The New Phariseeism by Louis de Boer, and
Okay.
even I got really old books. Now we're going back
Yeah,
here.
yeah. It
The
was
Delusion. I know it doesn't show up real quick, but The Delusion of British Israelism by Darms, and then I've got this one here, British Israelism, Bible truth or wishful
well,
thinking,
I
and
agree.
so I
I
think
agree.
that's one element. It's
Yeah.
one element. I don't
In other
think
words,
this issue's been
it was
treated with enough
required.
serious as the
So you
British
think
Israelites have.
you think that I would say, I was there, I mean, in the 80s. I don't know, were you born yet? In the early 80s?
Barely.
Okay. So, I mean, I saw it unfolding, and you had also all kinds of, who was that presidential candidate who would say that Queen Elizabeth is actually in charge of a huge drug running corporation? Uh, he overlapped. He was actually imprisoned for a while. His uh, oh geez, he did commercials and stuff, and he ran for president.
Lyndon,
Yeah, uh,
LaRouche. The
Lyndon LaRouche.
yeah, the LaRoucheites, yeah.
There was a lot of overlap between Lyndon LaRouche and Anglo-Israelites, but they never became a majority in the LaRouche movement.
Right.
And they never became. I would say that if I were to walk into any evangelical church in the mid 1980s, which was perhaps when the Church of the Aryan Nation was almost at its apex, hardly anybody would know, who Sheldon Emery was, or going down the list of prominent, promoters of Anglo-Israelism, and even less would they know the names of the authors of the books, the counterpoint books, the Christian apologetics books. In other words, people just weren't aware that this was going on.
Right.
It just was not. It wasn't making inroads. And so I would say that, yeah, I'm glad that there was a significant apologetics pushback. I'm just not so sure that it wouldn't have died anyways without that apologetics pushback.
So here's a way in that might have some merit. I'm not even going to try to say the name. Many Black Americans are drawn to Hebrew Israelism, see a strong parallel between our own history and the biblical story of the Israelites, particularly the experiences of enslavement, oppression, and liberation.
Yeah, the Exodus story, and the story of Moses and the children of Israel. I mean, it made it into the poetry of Paul Laurence Dunbar, one of the most famous Black poets of the early 20th century. And it was in one of his narrative poems in other words, it wasn't like he was promoting it. He was just reporting what was going on in the late 19th, early 20th century Black community. And so, there's a strong connection between the Exodus and the Black slaves being freed at the end of the Civil War. And so, yeah, there's already that's a connection that white people didn't have in the same way. If white people felt a connection, it was a theological connection, but it wasn't this kind of that they had.
Yeah, well, the interesting thing is, when you look at least early settlers of America, they viewed themselves sort of, at least a number of as new Israel coming into a new promised land
Right.
to
That
be a
is
new
true.
light to the world. So
That
they're
is
viewing it as their promised land. Enslaved persons are seeing it as their Egypt. This is
Yeah.
because of the different experiences that each group of people by and large is experiencing. And so you have the parallel. So with the old spirituals, of course, the parallels are there. If you read sermons or hear of the sermons reported of what like a guy like Nat Turner was talking about, you'll see that he's making those parallels. And so that's definitely true. So everyone asks, who am I? Where did I come from? Where am I going? But the problem does become more acute. It becomes more acute when you sort of have an intentional, for lack of a better word, stripping away of identity. And who wants to think of their history beginning as an enslaved person on foreign shores. And so that's not sort of, for lack of a better word, an attractive option to people. And so, because before that, it's sort of like a blank slate for a lot of people.
Mhm.
And so then, the Israelites come along and say, hey, open up your Bible to Deuteronomy 28. If you read Deuteronomy 28, these are curses that the Israelites are going to have happen to them if they disobey God. And then they'll go to verse 68 specifically after maybe looking at a few of the curses in Deuteronomy 28 that Moses gives as Yahweh's telling the Israelites, this is what's going to happen to you if you violate the covenant. Verse 68 says, hey, you guys are going to be enslaved and go into ships and go back to Egypt.
Yeah.
And they'll say, who did that happen to? And then they all of a sudden think transatlantic slave trade. Yeah, this is our people. We're the Israelites. We fulfill the curses.
Speaking of transatlantic slave trade, Israel Ben-Aguda is perpetuating a myth here.
Yeah, that's
18th century. Your grandfather wasn't being chased through the forests of Africa by any white devil. That is not true. If your great grandfather probably was being sold in a slave market, maybe great, where to which he had been sold by other black people. He probably had been captured in warfare, or just kidnapped by some black Africans who sold him into slavery. That's what happened. So white people came over and they went to the slave markets because they didn't want to spend time and energy chasing down slaves when they could just go to the market and get them. There was a song by Randy, the guy who wrote the songs for Toy Story, and he's done a lot of movie soundtracks, and he wrote popular songs in the 70s, like Mama Told Me Not to Come and songs like that. Oh, come on, I can't remember his name. But he wrote a song in the 70s called Sail Away. And the song was supposed to be about this white slave trader who's tricking a young black boy into getting into his boat and going to America for a better life. Well, that didn't happen either. They just went into the market and made the purchase. And how did they get into that market? How did the slaves get in there? Well, they were sold by their fellow black Africans, although they probably were from different tribes and even spoke different languages.
Yeah, I mean, by and large, the way it happened, that's the general way we understand. Everyone got to remember, this is over a period of 500 years. So there's multifaceted ways that all this went down.
Yeah.
When you flip it over here to the what became America, for example, we know from the story of the man that we know as Squanto, that he was a young boy playing by the shore with his buddies, and they saw a trading ship come in, and they liked the trading ships because they would trade items with them, so that there wasn't a foreign sight to them. These are Spaniards, and they would always trade trinkets and or they would trade furs and basically get trinkets, but maybe not always trinkets, blankets, whatever the case was. Well, anyways, the Spaniards would say, hey, we got some food for you too, just come get it. Well, they kidnap Squanto and all of his buddies and took them to Spain. Now the story gets very interesting. It's sort of a Joseph story in a lot of ways, Genesis 50:20, but nonetheless, there are a variety of ways. Now, by and large, from everything we understand, that's not generally what was happening off the Ivory Coast. Generally speaking, that's not what was going down. However, the European, primarily at that point, my understanding is demand for slaves. It transformed from just, hey, we've got these captured guys, to let's go raid our neighbors so we can have more stuff to trade that we want from these Europeans. So there's a whole wicked collaboration of people.
Right.
Now, here's the thing that One West Israelites do with that information. They say, remember, they're Israelites, so they're not African. They were Semites who lived in Africa, who were sold into slavery by Hamites, the native Africans. That's what One Westers do with that. So they don't view them as their brothers. The One Westers view them as foreigners in the sense of to Israel, but they were the natives to the land, and they were selling people who were foreigners amongst them.
It gets intricate. You have to come up with explanations, and it sounds like they have. It gets interesting, but sometimes I look at it and I say, wow, just so much to learn here, and I'm glad that
Yeah.
people like you who have taken the time. I mean, just looking at all of the other cults that we have, I'm so glad I didn't have to take the time to be as expert in them as others have. But sometimes you need to in order uh, to deal with the individuals who are caught up in it.
So we are at the end of our time. We're going to have to do this again. And maybe, you were mentioning that you need to do some way to do some teaching that's more accessible to people more easily. Maybe we do a Tuesday night group. Right now we're going through a book called The Game of Gods, dealing with a lot of things that have happened in culture, kind of back to what we might call the Tower of Babel 2.0 in process.
Well,
But we can do like a longer thing week to week if you want to do that. Then it would be online. So
one thing Ted East says is it's a fast-growing culture built off racism, and that really reminds me of the Nation of Islam. And it was for a while. It was fast-growing, and it was built off racism, Black Muslims.
yeah.
But anyways, yeah, there's so many things to explore.
Yeah, there was that famous 60 Minutes piece that was
Yeah.
called "The Hate That Hate Produced." So there are these reactionary elements, but I do think it's important to remember the precedent of the Anglo-Israelites. One reason I say that is because it wasn't a response to racism. It wasn't like we don't know that we're British. They wanted this feeling of we're special.
Right.
They wanted this idea of chosenness put upon them or something like that. And it's interesting the way British Israelites would often prove their identity. Yeah, they would get into Jacob's stone that he slept on being on the throne and all this stuff. But a key thing they would do is they would also go to Deuteronomy 28.
Yeah.
However, they would look at the blessings of Deuteronomy 28. And because of the great success of the British Empire, they would say, who is the nation that fulfills these blessings? And they would say that it's the British Empire that fulfills the blessings listed of Deuteronomy 28. So a key way that they approached their exegesis in regards to this matter was you do it by characteristics. You're determining the characteristics of a people. And so that's how they got to that. Now, they would add all this other stuff, like I mentioned, King Charles and King David and all this stuff. But really, that was the essence of it. And the Hebrew Israelites now basically do the same thing. And it's a fascinating thing. And it's more prominent in versions than we think. We talked about Mormons. Well, not only do they think Native Americans can a percentage of them, it used to be all of them, but they kind of messed around with it.
Right. Yeah.
Saintly scissors, editing the preface of the Book of Mormon. Well, they held that Native Americans were Israelites, just lost over here,
Right.
during some seafaring expeditions. Well, here's what's interesting. They still believe that if they're faithful. Glenn Beck has been shown multiple times trying to prove this stuff. Mormons themselves, when they get their temple sealing and blessing and all this stuff, the guy will whisper in their ear and tell them what tribe they're part of. It's almost always Ephraim, by the way. And so Joseph Smith himself claimed that he was descended from one of the tribes of Joseph. And that's how he got his name, type of thing. So a faithful Mormon would still hold in some way that they're Israelites. In fact, if you watch a movie called September Dawn, that's about the 9/11, the original 9/11, when the Mormons massacred settlers who were passing through on the Oregon Trail, and they killed them in Utah, Meadow Mountains or whatever. It's interesting. They portray the Mormons as frequently calling the foreigners coming through their territory as Gentiles. And that seems to be historically accurate. These Gentiles, because they're thinking of themselves as actually blood Israelites.
Right.
And if you guys remember the Sound of Freedom movie that came out, that was against child trafficking, it blew up. It did quite well. The guy responsible for that, Tim, I forgot his last name right now. He believes these theories. and has a book about this that you could pick up at Deseret. How do I know? I picked up a couple of his books when the movie came out because I said, "Oh, that's interesting." Because the guy at the center of the movie is a Mormon. He believes this stuff to this day, and talks about Joseph Smith being a descendant of the Israelites and Native American, and it's all right there. You just got to dig a little bit. So I'm just saying this stuff is around. The thing is, the Hebrew Israelism faction, that's the main emphasis of their belief. And that's the main primary thing, is the identity thing. And so it's a little bit different in that regard. But there's religions that have had elements of this mixed in there. You mentioned the Worldwide Church of God. They're still around in various versions.
Shepherd's Chapel.
Shepherd's Chapel.
Only in Shepherd's Chapel, the blacks are the sons of Satan. So you got that going on there.
Really?
Yeah, because he thinks that Eve had sex with the serpent and created black folks, basically.
Holy.
Yeah. So, this stuff goes around, and as you guys mentioned, Anglo-Israelism kind of got dispersed into all this Aryan nonsense. It's like the ideological bedrock now, and even, I guess, the Klans adopted some of these elements. So, it's sort of become this ideological thing that's morphed into something, I think, more sinister than when it began. Right. Now, what will happen with Hebrew Israelism? Don't know. We'll find out. But in the meantime, I believe the Lord needs some people to help those who are coming out. Yeah. And to be a witness against it, and to try to help the body understand what's going on around them.
Well, and with that, we're going to have to close up for today. Ron, would you waltz us out of here?
Let's give credit to whom credit is due. Let me push the button there. Okay. Our resident cult leader profiler is Neil before me. Our wardrobe manager is See How It Fits You. Culinary services are provided by Chef Ham and Cheese. Our tinfoil head provisioner is Just in Case. Jehovah's Witnesses coverage comes from Armageddon and D Opposer. Our Mormon Archives manager is Polygamus. Our Liberal Denominations Bureau Chief is Lucy Goosey. Transgender issues coverage comes from Ben Hur. Our special correspondent for cults based on the Hindenburg disaster and flying turkeys, Ode to Humanity. Our fact-checking supervisor is Yolite Cullen. Technical assistance comes through Mercury Research. Our legal advisors are at the law firm of Dewey, Cheatham & Howe. Our grievance resolution director is Giovanna Pisami, and our director of privacy assurance is wiretapping, and original idea sourcing comes from Drew A. Blank. The Unknown Webcast is a production of Midwest Christian Outreach, Inc. in cooperation with Emergency Manicure Productions, both of whom are solely responsible for this content, although you will never be able to prove that in a court of law.
Never happened. At least not so far.
Just started over again.
Okay. And we can wave adios to everybody out there and video land.